This is the project instructions for the Reversible Bucket Hat. So it is completely reversible. You can wear it either way. So you will want to pay careful attention to the fabrics that you're picking and just make sure it's something that is going to have a non-directional print. So both of these prints are non-directional. It doesn't matter which way they go. And one of them that I'm working with today is these little bows, and they can go any way. The other thing that you're doing in my class is you will make sure that you have enough fabric. And so when you're choosing a piece, we are going to try to have one that still has both selvages still in place, and we will have it cut into a 10-inch wide strip. So this is 10 inches wide times the width of the bolt, which is in this case a 44-inch wide piece. So you have three pattern pieces that you're going to be using for this project. You have the circle, which is going to be the top of the hat. And if you read on this, we're going to follow the instructions for the reversible. So I need 2 total circles, 1 from each of my prints that I have chosen. And you'll need 4 total of the headband, 2 out of this bow fabric and 2 out of my other fabric. And then the brim piece is just like the headband. I need 2 out of the bows and 2 out of my other. So I want to show you how to cut it out today because I want you to make sure that you're not wasting fabric and that you have plenty of fabric to cut out all your pieces. So you need 2 of these coordinating fabrics, 1 for the outside, 1 for the inside, 10 inches wide times the width of the bolt. And I'm starting out with one end of the selvage edge, and I'm just gonna fold it up just long enough to accommodate my brim piece. So here's my brim pattern piece where it says on the fold. I'm gonna make sure that I can place that on the fold, and I'm not cutting any of the selvage. So I just need to fold that selvage up. Here's my selvage now, and I'm laying that pattern piece down on the fold, and I'm getting it as close to this edge as I can, but making sure it's still on the fabric. And then you will just, you could either use pattern weights or pins is probably best, but you'll pin that pattern piece down, and then you're gonna be cutting out around it. Now I want you in class, if you're doing this with me, I want you to stand up while you're cutting. Just get in the habit of always standing over the cutting table or over your table when you're cutting. We don't wanna hold it and do this because see how the fabric kind of dips and hangs down? We wanna leave that laying flat on the table. I put my hand on top of the pattern. I have pinned to cut, meaning my pins are inside the dimensions of the pattern piece, so I don't have to try to cut around them. So I'm gonna go ahead and just cut this one as an example and trim out around it. And I'm gonna go ahead and cut straight across here, and I'll show you why in a second. This makes it easier, then I can just kind of set this aside. And now I can take this piece, see it was like this as I was cutting it, now I can turn it and just make it more comfortable for myself to cut out around the edge of that pattern piece and trim off all the extra. Now when I come to this end where it says on the fold, I do not cut there. I'm going to leave that fold intact. So now I'm gonna take my pins out, take the pattern piece off. I need to use this again, so I'm not getting rid of it. But then I take, here's what it will look like. Okay, here's my brim piece. Picture that like right across the top of your head, okay? So what I need to do next, I'm gonna set this aside just in a pile. I'm going to take this other little end. So here was where my pattern piece was before. It was sitting right there. And now, again, I'm gonna move it over. I'm placing it right next to this on the fold. And it's gonna get me right up to the cut edge of this fabric. Okay, so it's very important to put these in the exact right spot. Okay, once again, I'll pin that in place and then trim out around it. Now I'm not gonna do that on camera, but I'll just set that aside for now, so I'll end up cutting that out. This is that remaining piece that I had set off to the side, and now I'm just gonna take the end of it and fold it up just far enough to fit my headband piece. So it's labeled headband and I need 2 of it. So I'm gonna lay it on the fold and cut out around it. So I'll pin it in place and cut out around it. And then I'll move it over here, pin it in place and cut out around it. And then the only other thing we have to do is through a single layer, I need to lay out my circle for my cap, and I cut 1 circle in this fabric, okay? So I'm not going to show me cutting these, but you'll cut this here, this one here, cut your circle, and then the rest of this is just scrap that we can use for other small projects. So what you'll end up with is, out of both fabrics, you'll have 2 of your brim pieces, 2 of your headband piece, and 1 of the circles out of both of your fabrics. So I need 2 of my bows, 2 of my headband out of bows, and 1 of my circle. So just a quick inventory, I have a total of 4 brims, 4 headband, 2 circles, okay? And we're just gonna do some prep work. Basically what you're doing is you're creating the outside of the hat, and then you're creating the inside of the hat identical. So you're doing the construction steps the same for the outside as you're doing for the inside, and you end up sewing the 2 hats together, flipping them inside out, and then it's reversible. So all of the finished edges are on the inside, or all the raw edges are on the inside. It's really professional looking, but to make it go quicker, we are gonna do both the outside and inside steps at the same time. So whatever I do to one project, I'm gonna do to the other part, okay? So the first thing I'm gonna start with is my brim pieces. I'm gonna take them, I'm gonna open it all the way up, and I'm gonna lay it right side up. See, the print is bold and pretty, right side up. And then I take the other piece, the other brim, and I'm gonna lay it right sides together. Right sides together, and I'm matching up the ends. And for this, you can either use a pin or 2, or if you had sewing clips, you could clip your ends together as well. So I'm going to pin these ends, and then I'm going to just sit them aside. So I'm getting these prepped. Next, I'm going to take my other brim piece with my bows. So again, I'm going to lay this one right side up, and then I'm going to take the other piece right side down. So they're right sides touching, and we're matching here and here. Okay, so let's do that on all of the brim, and then you'll also do that on all of your headband pieces as well. And again, we're just prepping, so we're just gonna set it off to the side until we're ready to go to the sewing machine. We've got a headband up, another face down, and you wanna make sure they match up pretty much perfect. And if they are, then you know that you've got them laying the right way. Let me show you what I mean. Let's say you laid your piece out here. Let's say I lay this one right side up, and I go to lay this one right side down, and they look like that, where they don't match up right. All I need to do is take that piece and turn it, and now when I lay them right sides together, they're gonna match up. Okay, so I have done the prep work for my brim and my headband pieces, and I don't have any prep work to do for these, so we are ready to sew. You will be using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance for almost this entire project. So on our Baby Lock Rachel machines at school, this is one of the unmarked lines. If you look behind the presser foot, right in the middle on the throat plate, it says 1/4 inch. It's gonna be the next line over. And honestly, what it looks like is the edge of the fabric lined up, so I'm on a 1 on this stitch selector, and the edge of the fabric is lined up halfway between the edge of the foot and the clear plastic toe. If you are in my class, you can have me come point out to you exactly where to look, but basically it's just inside the right edge of the presser foot, 3/8 of an inch. Want to select a thread that is coordinating with your fabric, and I'm just going to test on a scrap. So I have this little scrap here, and I'm going to line it up again just inside the edge of the presser foot. And what you want to do then after you have sewn is just use a seam gauge, put it on 3/8 and make sure that it's right. So once you know where to look on your machine, that's really all that matters. We want a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our headband piece that we have clipped together, and I'm going to, on one of the clipped edges, I'm going to put in a 3/8 seam allowance. Okay, then I'm going to repeat that same process on the other end and on my other headband piece. I would stop now and have myself check your work, or you can check your work if you're doing this at home and just make sure that you have a 3/8 seam allowance on all of your pieces that you have stitched. I did a little chain piecing there, so I just need to cut those apart, but I have my two headband pieces ready sewn. I'm just gonna sit those off to the side, and I'm gonna repeat that same 3/8 seam on my brim pieces, on both of my brim pieces. All right, so now we have sewn all of our brim and headband pieces. I'm just gonna trim off any loose tails, do some tidying up, and then we're gonna head over to the iron. So we need all 4 of these pieces at the iron. All right, we are just gonna slide our piece over the end of the ironing board, and we are going to press all of our seams open. This does 2 things. It sets your seam, so it makes it more of a secure seam. And then the other thing that it does is it's gonna let our seams line up really nice with each other when we go to match the 2 pieces together. So I'll repeat that, pressing it open on all of my seams. There should be 8 of them. We're just coming off of the iron. All of our seams are pressed open, and on my brim piece, I'm gonna leave the fabric right now wrong side out. I'm gonna take my headband piece, that's the smaller of the 2, and I'm gonna flip it right side out. And I'm gonna try to identify which is the bottom and which is the top. So the bottom that's going to connect to my brim is slightly wider. It angles out. So this is the bigger part of the headband. That is going to be what matches up with the smaller opening of the brim. This will be one of those steps where you can check in and make sure that you are doing it correctly. So what I'm doing here is I'm matching up my seams. They're both pressed open. And then I'm just going to clip. You could use pins for this, but I actually really like the clips for this project. And we just want to make sure that our fabrics are right sides together, right sides touching, and that your seams line up. So one way to know if you have done this part correctly is if when you are clipping or pinning, if they just don't even come close. Now mine is like a little tiny bit off. I'm gonna have to stretch a little bit, but it's very, very close. So if mine was just nowhere near the right size, I would know that I have done something wrong. I've either sewn with the wrong seam allowance or trying to pin the wrong edge. So we will just clip, clip, clip all along. And then again, we're going to repeat that same clipping process on our other 2 pieces. What you should have is 2 sets of these brim and headband pieces clipped all together, and to make it easier to sew, we can take off this little drawer attachment and it frees up this arm so we can sew a circle. We're using the same seam allowance that we had been using all along, so we're doing a 3/8 seam. You'll just slide it under the presser foot and you're lining this edge that you had clipped or pinned up with that 3/8 mark, which remember is just inside of the presser foot edge. So on the right edge, it's just inside of it. My machine's on a 1. I do want to back stitch where I start and stop. So I'm just keeping my eye on that little spot halfway, so it's not quite even with the edge of the foot, 3/8 of an inch. Okay, we'll just do that all the way around. All right, so we have sewn the 3/8 seam. Basically, we have attached the hat brim to the hat band to both of our pieces, okay? And so you'll just wanna make sure that yours looks right, that your seams are lined up, and that's where we're at so far. So you have these 2 hats minus their tops. So the next step is to add the top. Okay, so we're gonna take our pieces, and I'm actually going to flip that again. I want them right sides together. So I was just showing you what it would look like. So now I have my hat piece wrong side out, and I'm just going to reach inside here. Okay, so let me get close. So it's wrong side out, but I'm gonna reach inside of the opening of the headband and I'm going to clip the circle in, right sides touching. And I would say the more clips, the better. And I would also say that using clips versus pins is going to help you become a little bit more successful with this part. So use clips, and you're gonna line up right along the edge. Circle to the top of the headband piece. They should line up really nice and straight so you don't end up with any gaps. Just take your time with this part, but the better you clip it now, the easier it will be for you to sew it later. Okay, I've got 1 or 2 more clips left. Okay, see how that just fits perfect right there? We are ready to clip that in place. And then we're gonna repeat the clipping exactly the same using the other fabric. So I'm not gonna record that part, but you'll do the exact same process. If you need to rewind it and see, we're reaching inside, right sides touching, clip the circle. All right, the next part we're doing is we're gonna be sewing around the top of the hat, the circle. Now here's the deal. If you have a big head, if you know that you have a big head, then you are going to use a 1/4 inch seam. All that means is that on our sewing machines in class, you will turn the stitch selector to a 2 and use the edge of your foot. Now, if you have a smaller head, then go ahead and use the 3/8 seam allowance that we've been using the whole rest of the project. By using the 1/4 inch seam allowance, it just gives you a little bit more room for the hat to fit down up against your head if you have a larger head. But the key is, whatever you do for this one, make sure it's the same seam allowance that you use on your other print so that it fits together in the end, because they have to be exactly the same size. So I am gonna go ahead and do the 3/8 for the smaller head. So to do this, we want to just make sure the fabric is laying flat, that we aren't accidentally, and this is the trick, you want to really take your time on this. You don't want to accidentally let any extra fabric get tucked in there and where you'll cause a crinkle. So I'm going to go ahead and drop my needle, lower my presser foot, and then see what I'm doing with my hand? I'm scooching the extra fabric out of the way. I don't want anything to get caught underneath the needle as I'm stitching. And I'm just going to use my fingers to kind of manipulate the fabric, make sure that the edges are lined up, the edge of my circle and the edge of the hat band. And I'm just gonna do a small section at a time. Now I come to this next section, I'm gonna take the clip out. Again, I'm gonna take my hand under the fabric and I'm just kind of getting it out of the way. I don't want to accidentally sew through any other layers. I'm sewing through 2 layers only, the circle and the band, okay? So just take your time, lots of extra care and attention at this step because you are sewing on a circle. It takes just a little bit more effort to keep everything straight and lined up. So even though I have my machine up high, I'm not just cruising through it. I'm taking my time, stopping and starting again, making sure everything looks right. Now I have just taken my hat off of the machine and now you can see there's that 3/8 seam all the way around. Double check that you caught yours and we don't have any holes or gaps. And then you can kind of flip it inside out and see what it's gonna look like. Okay, so this is what the outside or inside of my hat looks like. Okay. Kind of dorky, but it's there. Okay, and then we have to still finish sewing the other side and attach the 2 together. Okay, we're getting ready to sew the other side. Now remember, did you use a 1/4 inch seam on your first half? If so, that's what you will be using again on this one. Did you use a 3/8 of an inch seam? If so, that is what you'll use on this one. Make sure you use the same seam allowance for both parts of your project. So we have both of our circle tops of the hat installed now. And just trim up any tails, double check if you have any holes or spots that need repaired. Now is the time to fix them. What you're gonna do now is you're going to attach the 2 pieces together to make it reversible. So what we're gonna do, this one piece I had already flipped right side out. I'm gonna leave it right side out. And this one is wrong side out. So when I sit it over the top of it, I'm gonna find my side seams that I lined up. I wanna find them again on the other side and kind of line them up. But when I slide that over the top of it, now I have right sides touching, right sides together. Very important here so that when we flip our hat right side out, it's gonna be right side out on both pieces. We have all finished work on the inside of the hat. No raw edges showing later. Okay, so it's right sides touching. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make sure my seam here is lined up perfectly. And then we're just gonna pin or clip all the way around the brim part of the hat. So we are just going to clip along the brim. And then just like when we have done a pillow, or if you did a chapstick holder where you have to flip it inside out, we are gonna leave an opening, just a small opening, big enough for the entire project to slide through. So that's a really important part. It's just along the brim. And I like to keep it where I think the back of my hat is going to be. So if I were guessing, this would be the front of my hat and this is gonna be the back. So along the back, I'm just gonna put 2 clips side by side. That is a visual reminder that I am not going to sew between these double clips. So I would actually start sewing here, sew all the way around until I get to here and leave that open. And make sure that you backstitch where you start and when you stop. And this is going to also be done with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Alrighty, so it's ready to sew. I'm gonna head over to the sewing machine. I'm looking for my double clips and I'm gonna just lay the hat flat on the machine. I'm using that 3/8 seam allowance. I'm gonna backstitch where I start and I just cruise along here, just making sure that my edges are lined up. I do want to make sure my seam allowance here lays flat. See how it just kind of lays flat and open all the way up? I don't want to accidentally let it flip open. I want it to lay flat as I go across it. There we go. And then we just keep going all the way around till you get to the other end, and you'll backstitch when you get to the other set of double clips. All right, here's what we should have. 3/8 seam allowance all the way around until we get here. We have our opening. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim these little tails, find that opening, and I'm just gonna flip the pillow through it. So it's gonna come right side out through the opening. Okay, so right now it's just kind of like a pouch, but very soon it will look like a 2-sided hat. Okay, reversible hat. All right, so I've got everything flipped. Now, watch this. I'm gonna take this inside part and I'm gonna stuff it down in to the other half. Now is where we will iron and press this really nice and neat. Okay. Because we want it to lay really nice. The more care and attention you give to this step, the nicer and more professional your project will look, okay? It doesn't happen naturally. You've got to kind of work with the fabric. And in fact, even before going to the iron, I could just clip this. I'm manipulating the fabric with my fingers so that we have clearly one fabric on one side and the other fabric on the other side. Whereas by nature, it wants to kind of curve. I'm gonna manipulate it so that the seam is running right across the top. And one fabric's on one side and the other fabric is on the other. As you do this in class, call me over to look at it and see if you're doing it well. It's just gonna take some effort on your part to clip that around, okay? So I'll just keep working on that. You can also need to take it over to the iron. I'll show you that here too. I've kind of zoomed in so you can maybe see what I'm talking about. See how this gray is kind of peeking out from underneath? We want to make sure that we do not see that gray at all when we're on this side of the project. And later, if I'm wearing the hat with the gray side up, I don't want to see any of these bows sticking out. It should be completely reversible, okay? So the clips I was adding here were to straighten out the brim, making sure I have the bows on one side and the gray on the other. But I can also use the iron to do that. So just iron along the brim. In fact, a combination of ironing it and the clips would be amazing. And then it will stay in place for you while you're top stitching, because that is the next step. Okay, so this is the main thing. Here's the opening. Make sure we can see it. Here is the opening. So we want to turn that opening under 3/8 of an inch. That should be even with your seam allowance. Okay, so it should look no different. That opening should look no different than the rest of the hat. I'm gonna press it. And then I'm gonna clip it. Okay, and I'll just continue to do that the rest of the way around here. One final thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna slide the hat over the top of the ironing board, and I'm just going to sort of iron. I don't wanna melt my clips, but I'm just gonna sort of iron down the brim. I'm also making sure that the inner piece and the outer piece are pulled tight. And we can do this, we can do more pressing later too, but it helps to get it really tucked up nicely inside. Okay. Okay, so this very first step is to secure the two pieces together. We are gonna do a 1/4 inch from the edge, and this will hold over our opening. So I'm gonna move my machine from a 1 on the stitch selector to a 2. And then I'm gonna use the edge of my presser foot to as my guide. So I'm just lining the presser foot up with the edge of my hat, and I'm just gonna stitch around in a complete circle all the way around the hat. All right, so we have stitched one full time around. Now you're going to be doing this next step over and over again until you've stitched all the way across just the brim part. So now I'm gonna turn my machine back to a 1, and then I'm gonna use the edge of my presser foot, and I'm gonna line the edge of my presser foot up with my last stitch. And so it's just gonna give me a nice wide stitch between each previous stitch. I'm just gonna line the right side of my foot up with that previous stitch line and just sew in a full circle around, and I just repeat that over and over again until I get all the way across here. All right, fresh off of the sewing machine. Now you'll notice on mine, maybe, I was able to do my original 1/4 inch from the edge top stitch. And then I was able to do 1, 2, 3, 4 rows of stitching at about a 1/2 inch each to finish up the look of the brim. That's really all it took. So then, now I have my bucket hat. Now I don't know if I love it for myself, but I do see a lot of kids wearing these, and then it's reversible. So we can flip it. Okay. And I might want to take this actually over to the iron one last time to press it a little bit. I don't know how to wear it, but anyway. There it is, completely reversible bucket hat.